For those old enough to remember the original Doom, you may have memories of installing the game from floppy disks, or perhaps getting your first taste of Episode 1 via shareware. Even though Wolfenstein 3D could technically be seen as the father of modern first-person shooters, it wasn't until the release of Doom the following year that first-person shooters would explode in popularity and continue to almost 3 decades later. But why was Doom so awesome for its time and contribute to countless imitators, and what made Doom 2016 such a success when it could have easily been a disaster? We can contribute the success of Doom in 1993 to come down to a few key areas, whereas Doom 2016 has other problems and areas that it needed to overcome in order to do justice to the name. If we cast our minds back to 1993, or if you're too young to remember or weren't born yet, let's take a trip down memory lane to when the internet was slow and used only by the minority. Software was often installed from disks, monitors were heavy and chunky, and where a game by the name of Doom would become a classic and change gaming forever. This video is about the id Software classic and how it would go on and retain what made it great with the reboot in 2016. So the original Doom would get 2 sequels, with Doom 2 being excellent, whilst Doom 3 would go in a different direction and changing the tone with it going for more scares and less action. id Software would go on also to create other excellent shooters with the Quake series, and Wolfenstein will also become its own series, albeit with another developer in Machine Games, and both developers would become owned by ZeniMax, the parent company of Bethesda. But when Doom 4 was confirmed as being in development back in the late 2000s, it was going to continue what had come before, but id Software decided to reboot the franchise and give gamers the fantastic Doom in 2016. Upon its release, it received favourable reviews and fans were overall happy with the game. But in 23 years since the original, what had been changed, and did it feel and play like Doom? The original is a bare-bones first-person shooter by today's standards, but back in 1993, it was fresh and players flocked to it. It is a game of its time, with very plain and simple environments, with game mechanics of the day such as exploring the maps and finding the appropriate coloured keycards in order to open the corresponding doors. This would often mean backtracking through the level to open up other areas and defeating the enemies within. Differing from many modern-day shooters, recovering health was done by picking up health packs, and this extended to getting armour and weapons as well. Players could carry all guns at the same time, and there was also no reloading. Both features of the game which are very different to many other first-person shooters today, where players have a limited amount of weapons they can carry and reloading is common. And that brings us to the 2016 reboot, where instead of trying to adhere to modern-day standards for the latest Doom, id Software would choose to keep many of these elements, and in doing so, it still feels like you're playing Doom. It's just that everything is cranked up to 11, and playing the original again, you can see how the Doom of 2016 is continuing a legacy, but it's also creating its own in a new gaming era, for a new era of gamers. Even though it carries across elements such as no reloading and needing to find keys to open doors, it also introduces other features which appear in modern games, and it deepens the Doom we already know. Players continue to find weapons in the environment, just as the original, but now they can be upgraded with skill points which are earned through challenges, as making sure your weapons are upgraded is integral to killing the demons and enemies, especially at the higher difficulty settings. There is also the slight risk and reward element which sees weak enemies begin to flash and stop attacking, which allows players to charge in for a gory kill. This will also drop health for players, and even after dozens and dozens of times, it's still enjoyable to snap off a demon's horn only to slam it down into his head to finish him off. And that brings me to the gameplay. The original Doom was a fast shooter for its time, but also differed from modern shooters, as players couldn't look up or down, something we take for granted these days. But in 1993, controllers with dual analog sticks were non-existent, and playing with keyboard and mouse on a PC with such quick gameplay was very rare compared to today. Now, when I say the 2016 reboot is fast, it's also a bit of an understatement, as when the hordes of enemies start to spawn in all shapes, sizes and difficulty, players will need to continually move around the arena trying to avoid being hit. You'll need to do this also to try to find more ammo, health packs and armor, and these sequences are tense and go above and beyond what the original Doom could deliver, and that extended to the story as well, with it being incredibly simplistic. But for the reboot, id Software found a good middle ground in how to deliver the game's narrative. Now, I'm a person that loves a great single-player campaign with a great story, memorable characters, cutscenes, set pieces, and all the rest. But when it comes to Doom, I don't really want these things, as they would stifle the feeling of what Doom is and the frantic gameplay that it employs. The narrative side of things in the reboot is done well and far beyond what the original had, but it never gets in the way of the gameplay, which is a good thing. It gets even deeper when we delve into the codex, where we can find a large amount of information regarding the environment and levels, the monsters we are fighting and the weapons we are using. It's all unnecessary, as we can play the game and enjoy it without all of this excess of information. But for those interested, it just builds up the world and its lore, and another difference between it and the original. But the reboot never loses sight of what it's trying to be. A huge part of the original Doom's popularity was because of its multiplayer component, and back then, most multiplayer gaming was done on the couch in the same room. But Doom would open up a whole new world for many gamers, including myself. Playing deathmatch against friends over a LAN was such fun, even if we were still in the same room or the same house. But it's safe to say that Doom heavily contributed to my love of gaming, especially when I started playing deathmatch with those same friends over the internet just a few years later with a 33.6 kbps modem, tying up the phone line as much as I could. But even though each of these games are similar in their makeup, there is nothing in the 2016 reboot's multiplayer that would make it a must-play, and the magic of the original's multiplayer all those years ago is hard to replicate in this internet-connected multiplayer gaming landscape of today. But that doesn't stop the reboot from being so memorable. Doom 2016's greatest success is its single-player campaign, and delivers an experience which is both honourable to the original, whilst also being its own game and able to compete with shooters of today. It's much scarier and atmospheric than the original, which is due to their fantastic visual presentation, which makes you feel like you really are on Mars in this hellish landscape. This is how I'd imagine the original game to look had the technology of today been available all those years ago. Doom 2016 is the culmination of decades worth of technology upgrades and advances that can paint the world of Doom as only modern hardware can and truly bring it into the 3D world. Contrast this to id Software's earlier games, including Doom, where the games weren't actually 3D at all. Instead, they were faking their 3D through clever programming tricks such as raycasting and binary space partitioning. Be sure to click the link in the description if you want to read up more on the technology which powered Doom. But even though it was impressive back in 1993, the hardware which the game ran on wasn't quite powerful enough to render fully 3D levels in action-oriented first-person shooters. And this would remain the case until 1996 when the fantastic Quake was released. But once 2016 rolled around, these limitations were long gone and gamers were already being flooded with huge, detailed environments, high-resolution textures, advanced AI and physics calculations. A far cry from the simple 2D sprites which were in the original Doom. And speaking of simple, the limitations of the hardware back in the early 90s also restricted the amount and quality of music which could be included. But as soon as you start the first level, the music is just so memorable whereby I can still hear it in my head almost 3 decades later. But Doom 2016 absolutely just punches you in the face when it comes to music, far exceeding any expectations which I had. With its hard-hitting, heavy rock, crossed with electronica and distortion, if there was ever a soundtrack to a game that would pump you up to take on these demons, then this is it. And this is very reminiscent of Trent Reznor's work with the music for Quake. It's loud, it fits perfectly with the action, and it imbues players with a sense of confidence for the challenges which lay ahead. So with gamers spoilt for choice when it comes to shooters, with many of them offering a visual feast as well, what would the latest Doom offer in order to get gamers' attention apart from its name? The answer to this lies in its gameplay as mentioned earlier, but also its brutality, arsenal of weapons, and its enemy design. id Software were at the forefront of first-person shooters, and although the majority of weapons included weren't anything players hadn't heard of before, they did become iconic in gaming, as did the introduction of several new weapons which were created for the game, and these would be brought across to the latest installment in addition to some new ones. Let's start with the shotgun, which is probably one of my favourite guns in any game and brings back a lot of memories, and the same goes for the super shotgun, which was introduced in Doom 2 and makes its appearance once again in 2016. The sound effects and just the power behind it when you hit an enemy has always been so satisfying. Of course, we have the obligatory pistol, but then players have the pleasure of using the chain gun, which was great in the original, but the reboot just took it up a level. Pushing the trigger as you start to hear the barrel rotate, then unleash a ton of bullets onto your foes is awesome. Then moving up to the rocket launcher with its explosive splash damage, or the introduction of the Gauss cannon in Doom 2016, which shoots a high impact beam of energy and gives some welcome diversity amongst the weapon lineup. We also have the classic chainsaw, which requires fuel, but is always so satisfying cutting through these enemies repeatedly, even if it does deplete rather quickly. The plasma rifle shoots out plasma rapidly and once again gives some diversity, and along with all the previous weapons, can be upgraded and have alternate ways to fire them, but it also leads into what is perhaps the most famous weapon in Doom history and anyone who gamed a lot in the 90s. The BFG, a gun which had to make a return in the reboot, and when players fire this plasma-filled beauty, the ultimate destruction rains down upon the battlefield. When you take all these weapons, the no reloading mechanic, which causes very little downtime during firefights, then Doom 2016 takes the core of what made the original and just expands upon everything and brings it into the modern age. With beautiful graphics and environments, and beauty, if you want to call it that, extends to ugly and ghastly enemies which are designed so well that you can't help but enjoy the feeling of destroying the hordes of grotesque demons which are vying for your blood on Mars. And that brings me back to just how incredibly influential the original Doom was. Any game which can inspire imitators must be doing something right to warrant that imitation. But when I speak about Doom, I'm talking about not just any game that others have tried to copy and wanted its success. The original Doom's imitators became known as Doom clones. Not only because they were using the same or modified version of the game engine, it was because it was the new game in town and other developers wanted that success that John Carmack and John Romero had enjoyed. Doom was hell in a bottle and other developers wanted to open it and that success to soak into their own games. As the genre moved forward over the years, the term Doom clone stuck around in the 90s and was directed at other games such as Duke Nukem 3D, Marathon, Heretic, and even extending to the Star Wars license with the excellent games of Dark Forces and Jedi Knight. But by 2016, the industry had changed so much and Doom clones didn't exist anymore. With Doom 3 having been released in 2004, many years had gone by and a new set of gamers didn't have the same affinity towards the original or the series. The reboot was now competing with the modern-day heavy hitters with the likes of Call of Duty, Battlefield, Overwatch, and even Battle Royale games of Fortnite or PUBG, not to mention the likes of Counter-Strike. But the greatest success of the Doom reboot for myself was that it didn't set out to try and be these popular games. It wasn't trying to now imitate other games as other games had wanted to imitate it back in the day. It was made to deliver a modern-day Doom that adhered to its classic status whilst updating it and providing more depth. In this regard, for long-time Doom fans such as myself, we went into the game entering hell and realised we were more in heaven.